We all have a picture of Jesus in our head. Maybe yours looks something like this, or this, or this. But he also did stuff like this, and this, and this. He wasn't always meek and mild. Sometimes he came across as flat out savage.
Good morning again. Good to see you guys. And man, we are jump-starting this series today that I've been looking forward to all year. We're going to talk through some of the weirdest and wildest things that Jesus did. I'm sure if you are a Christ follower, these are probably some of the situations and phrases that happened or were said by Jesus that when you talk about your faith, people are like, what about that one time? That was weird. And you're like, that was weird. And you don't know what to say. And we're going to spend some time sort of talking through and asking questions about and decoding and trying to understand a lot of these things. So it's going to be a really fun 5 weeks over the next 5 weeks. And I want to encourage you to be here for as many as possible. There should be some invite cards on your chairs, so feel free to take those with you. Invite some people along to join you over the course of the month of May for the rest of this series. But today, as we kick it off, I want to encourage you to take some notes. Write down some things that stand out to you, some things that seem interesting, some things that you just want to think about a little bit more, process through. Figure out if that's really what you think, if that's really what you believe, and if you're going to do something about it. And if you are taking notes, the title of my message today is Watch Me Whip. Watch Me Whip. My wife, Gretchen, and I, we have 3 kids, and a few years ago when they were a bit younger, look at how cute. Oh, man, just so adorable. Some of you that are awing, it's just because you don't know them now. But no, they're awesome. But I remember like around this stage, this one day specifically is burnt in my brain where I was driving around. We had a bunch of boys in the back seat. So it was my 2 boys at around this age and a couple of their friends. And they had this little iPod that they were like watching something on. And then it got to a place where they were like fighting over the iPod, and somebody else wanted to pick something and they wanted to show something and they wanted to be the one to touch it. And somebody else was holding it at a weird angle, and they're fighting, and I'm driving and it's just me. My wife's not in the car. And these 4 boys are just feuding in the back seat. And I can just feel the anger rising. Anybody ever had a moment like this? And so I get to that place where I'm like, okay, guys, calm down, okay? And you're kind of doing the half laugh so that you don't yell because you're afraid of the place that you're being pushed to. And I just like, they're going at it, and they start, and finally they're like full on yelling, and then somebody kicks the back of my seat, and it just pushes me over the edge. You know, where you can just feel it rising, and finally you're like, that's it! Right? And I'm driving, and I'm just like, okay, give it to me, right? Like, have you even parented if like this isn't like a big picture that your kids have of you, of just like this thing that you're trying to like punch, and your kids are like dodging, you know, trying to get away from you. And I'm like, nobody gets it anymore. I'm getting it. Stop it. And like, I just wanted them to shut up. You know what I mean? Like, it was just, there's already enough noise in my head. I didn't need all this extra noise. And finally, like, I have my hand, finally somebody puts the iPod in my hand, and I grab it, and I just throw it on the floor in the front seat because I'm just so upset. And the car gets so quiet. And it's just like really, and then Zeke, our youngest, he's like 6 years old. He leans over to his buddy and he's like, sorry, man, my dad's being a little immature today. I'm like, and of course I'm sitting in the front seat, and I'm thinking like, I'm not immature, you're immature, you know? And then I'm like, oh man, that sounds immature, you know? Anybody ever get called out by your own kids before, where like your own toddler is just like, you really ought to get it together. And you're just like, shut up, what do you know? And then in the back of your mind, you're like, they're right. I'm losing it, right? And, you know, in all fairness, I probably was acting a bit immature, but I'm also in good company, right? Because we all get to these places where we just get so frustrated we don't know what to do. And the anger feels like it's going to boil over. And you don't have to look very far and wide in our culture to see people just losing it every single day. I mean, look over, there's a car next to you where somebody is yelling at somebody on the phone or yelling at somebody in another car or yelling at you from their car. I mean, people freaking out. Like, log online, there are people that are just losing their minds in the comments section and just can't, keep it control. If you go to the soccer fields, like a block away on a Saturday, there are a handful of parents that are losing their minds, screaming at refs. The ref is like a 14-year-old kid who is reffing like a game of 6-year-olds. And there's some parent that's just like, I'll murder your family, ref. And you're just like, whoa, what is happening, right? Just so much that's going on constantly. We see it everywhere. And these moments when we observe them happening, like we see somebody else doing it, they're not moments that stir up a lot of admiration, right? It's not usually a moment where we're like, wow, that was so beautiful. When I saw that happen and I saw that guy almost strangle an elderly woman, I just thought, you know what? That is someone who is passionate and they care about things, and that is the kind of person I want to be, right? No, we side with Zeke. We're like, man, they are being very immature today, right? Like there's something going on there. They need to get it together. This is very embarrassing for them. Because the truth of the matter is, nobody wants to be this unpredictable, rage-filled monster that everybody else has to tiptoe around. But we've all known a few of these in our lifetime. And at the same time, and this is why this is hard to juggle, is what are you supposed to do, right? Because we don't want to be the sort of people who are constantly being taken advantage of and just steamrolled. Like, are you just never supposed to stick up for yourself? Are you just supposed to let people walk all over you and just do crazy, insane things? These are the sort of questions that we have to wrestle with when we begin to sort of take a look at our spiritual lives. And I think it brings up really important questions of like, what is the goal of Christianity? What is the point of the whole thing, right? Is the goal of Christianity to become this dispassionate presence where like nothing bothers you, right? Where you don't react to anything and you just sort of float through life in this steady, unfazed, Zen-like state? Like, a lot of us, when we think about this, we're like, that might be the point, right? And part of the reason why we think maybe this is what Christianity is because maybe this is the impression of what Jesus was like, that he was just sort of always calm, that he was just sort of always chill, that nothing sort of fazed him. I think a lot of us, when we think about Jesus, some sort of picture comes to mind, and maybe for a lot of us, we picture Jesus as sort of this, this loving, downcast, pale-skinned white man, right? Who is holding a lamb lovingly and whispering to it, and his beautiful reddish blonde hair just perfectly combed, like cascading down over his very unstained cream robe. And we're like, that's my Jesus. That's what he's like. And I'm that lamb, just snuggled in, right? And not quite, right? Yes, we did a whole series on a psalm as Jesus is a shepherd, but there is something that is right and also wrong about this image because it sort of isolates an aspect of Jesus, but not the totality of who Jesus is. Because the reality is, Jesus was often a calming presence, but he was anything but dispassionate. In fact, when you read through the Gospels, you get a picture of a deeply passionate person. He cared about a lot of things in big, big ways. There were moments where he confronted directly and debated with people. There were moments where he wept uncontrollably and he tore his clothes in like discouragement and mourning. There were moments where he sarcastically barbed and cursed at people. There were moments where he raised his voice in anger and he flipped tables and he caused a massive scene. These are all real things that happen. And if you're like, wait, did all it really happen? We're going to cover a lot of it in this series, so you're going to want to stay tuned. Well, maybe you're just like, okay, how is that any different than people just losing control and melting down on reels online, right? How is it? Is this the message that Jesus is just as unhinged as you are? And sometimes we're all just going to freak out and lose control and do things that we're embarrassed by and probably should have been arrested for, right? Is that how it is? It's just part of life. That's just the way it's going to be. I don't think that is the core message here. But I think to really understand this, to wrestle with it, we've got to unpack some of these stories together. I think a best place to start is one of the most infamous stories about Jesus being angry. And we're just going to move through and sort of peel this apart and see if we can make sense of it together. It's found in John chapter 2, and we're going to start reading in verse 13. It says that it was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration. And so Jesus went to Jerusalem. Now, this is sort of the setup to the story, but it's important to understand what's happening here. And essentially, Passover is this religious holiday that celebrates the Jews' freedom from slavery in Egypt. And so all of the Jewish people, especially during this time in history, would travel to the temple in Jerusalem to make animal sacrifices that made them right with God. And these were burnt offerings. So the entire city smelt of delicious barbecue, right? It was so tasty. Holy. It was holy. And once you got there, right, you could smell it from miles away, but once you got there to the base of the Temple Mount, you'd undergo this ritual washing ceremony, and you would put on a white robe, and you would begin to make your way up the mountain towards the temple, singing these songs alongside all of these other pilgrims that had come to make their sacrifices as well. And these songs are still around. They're in the middle of the Psalms. They're called Psalms of Ascent because they were like a sort of ascending up this mountain and praising God as they went every step of the way. And so Jesus is doing the same thing. Jesus is Jewish. He's participating in this tradition that he'd done since he was a little boy. He is gone through the ritual washing. He's put on the white robe. He's making his way up the mountain. And when he gets to the top, this is what he sees. In verse 14, it says, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices, and dealers at the tables exchanging money. So, first of all, what he's seeing, in and of itself, at a very base level, is not a bad thing, right? Because here's the reality. These were people who were meeting a need. Everybody had to provide their own animal to sacrifice for their sins. And, they weren't complimentary, right? When you showed up, they weren't just like, right this way, choose anyone you like, right? You had to either bring your own or you had to figure out how to get one when you got there. And the thing that was complicated about this was it couldn't just be any animal, right? It had to fit in with some very specific paradigms. There were rules. Because if there's anything the Jews were good at, it was making up great rules. They had rules for everything. And these were some of the rules around these sacrificial animals. This is found in Leviticus chapter 22, verse 21. These are the books of the Jewish law that we tend to skip over because we're like, what is going on here? And I'm about to tell you. Verse 21 says this, if you present a peace offering to the Lord, it may have no defect of any kind. It must not be blind, crippled, or injured, or have a wart, skin sore, or scabs. If a bull or a lamb has a leg that's too long or too short, it may not be offered to fulfill a vow. If an animal has damaged testicles or is castrated, you may not offer it to the Lord at all. Some of you are like, this is wildly specific in ways I never would have imagined, right? Have you ever really just looked at an animal and was like, can I see all of the legs side by side? Which one? Are there any that are, I'm going to need to examine those testicles real quick just to see if there's any crushing or mutation. I need to find a sacrifice. Not typically things we think about, but the idea here was that you had to sacrifice something perfect to cover over your imperfections. That's how the process worked at the time. But it brings up this really important question, what if you didn't have an animal? What if you didn't have a perfect animal? Or what if you did, but you traveled and it got lost or attacked along the way? A coyote, tried to get it at night. Your chubby kid sat on it, the leg broke out. You know what I mean? What? There's all sorts of things that could happen with these animals. What if you had one, but yours, you noticed on the way, it has a lazy eye. It has like a weird hoof fungus, you know what I mean? Like it has a light little cough, I don't know. What then? You'd have to buy one. But when you got there, you would be in luck, right? Because there are all these vendors that would set up in the outer courts of the temple to sell you what you needed. But before you could buy from them, especially if you came from a long distance, you would have to convert your currency to the currency that was used in and around the temple. And you still have to do this if you travel to a foreign country today, right? Or if you go to a Chuck E. Cheese, right? Either way, you got to convert that currency. You know how it is. You go to the Chuck E. Cheese and you're just like, do they take dollars? And it's like, no, they take cheese coins. You got to get the special cheese coins. You got to go to that little metal box, right? And you put your dollar bills in and it just spits out the cheese tokens with the smiling rat. And you're like, now we can play some games. And that's sort of like, this is like the spiritual version of that, right? Is what's happening here. And so Jesus, he gets there and he sees the same thing that he saw every year growing up. It's not like this is the first year that these people were out there doing this. In fact, it's probable that because Jesus grew up honoring Passover every single year since he was a kid, that he made this trek with his parents, and that his parents may have even have bought sacrificial animals from these exact merchants or their parents when he was younger. And yet, this time, this particular day, when he gets there, something is different about it than it has been before in enough of a way that he gets triggered and it sets him off. And this is what happens. In verse 15 of John chapter 2, it says, Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. He drove out the sheep and cattle, scattered the money changers' coins all over the floor, and turned over their tables. And then he told them, get out of here. Now, when you were a kid, did you ever have a moment where you pushed one of your parents too far and they just grabbed whatever was handy to swat you with? Anybody else have this upbringing? Right? They're like, that's it! And then they just grabbed a wooden spoon, a fly swatter, a flip-flop, whatever they had handy, and then, you know what I mean? They were just going to whack you, right? And you had to be careful when you were going to sass, You're like, maybe don't share an opinion while dad's ironing, okay? Because I don't know where this is going to go, right? No, Mom, not the cheese grater. You know what I mean? Like, there are certain implements that would be horrible, actually, now that I think about it. Man. And it kind of almost looks like, is this what's happening here? And not quite, right? Because I want to draw your attention to the way this is phrased. And it's phrased in every translation or iteration of this. It doesn't say he grabbed a whip. It says he made a whip. He made a whip. Now, I'm not an expert on whip making, as you think I would be, right? But I would imagine that there is a fair amount of weaving and braiding involved, that this is like not a very quick task, which is funny to me when I think about it. I just think about Jesus seeing this scene and being like, I am angry. You guys are going to get it. As soon as I finish making this handmade artisanal whip, and he's weaving all this stuff, he's like, oh, man. Oh, yeah. They're just waiting for him. They're like, what is happening right now? Oh, yeah, I'm going to get to it. Woo! Feel the rage building. There's a real art to this thing. I like to go over, under it, and then pull it tight. Can you help me? Because this is more of a two-person job, okay? And then I'm going to whip you, okay? Make your own whip with me. This is a wild scene. And the reason I bring that up is, and I think this is a crucial detail, there was some lag time between when Jesus felt angry and when Jesus took action. And I want to tell you, if you want to sort of quell moments that you regret in your life, you need to create some space between when you feel the anger and when you take the action, right? And this is what Jesus is doing here. This is not a rash maneuver. This means that Jesus, what he's doing, he is not out of control. He is doing this on purpose and for a purpose. But even though that's true, no matter how you slice it, he's angry. And maybe you're just like, man, I can't reconcile that in my mind. Not my Jesus. Oh, no, not my Jesus would never. My Jesus would say, hey, no, thank you. and then he would put them in the corner to think about their choices, okay? And maybe give them a snack, because when you're thinking, you get hungry sometimes, right? And Jesus is compassionate. But he didn't do that. And maybe you're wondering, like, but isn't that wrong? I mean, like, isn't it wrong? Isn't it sinful to react out of an angry state? But at the same time, Scripture makes clear to us in several different moments, such as 1 Peter 2:22, that Jesus never sinned and he never told a lie. So how can that be? And part of this is because I think we have a disconnect in understanding what anger actually is. Anger is not a sin, it's an emotion. I mean, you guys saw Inside Out, right? You know how it works. Anger is this reactive feeling that says something is wrong and it needs to be set right. It's evidence that you have a sense of justice. That's where anger comes from. It indicates that you care. In fact, the only reason any of us have the capacity for anger is that we are made in the image of God, and God gets angry. So I guess the question is, when it comes to your life, are you angry like God, or are you just angry? Because there is a difference. And I think a lot of people who are just like, oh, I'm angry on behalf of God. I think God is just like, you know what? That's all you, buddy. I got nothing to do with what's going on here. There's this verse in Ephesians, the New Testament. One of the writers says this: be angry and do not sin. I wonder if you've ever seen this before. You know, the scriptures are like, hey, be angry. There are certain things that ought to make you angry. If you are so numb on the inside that you never get angry, something is off. Be angry, but when you're angry, don't sin. So anger is not sin, but anger can push us into a moment in which we sin. I think we've all had moments where our anger took over and we found ourselves doing something that we are not proud of. I think the question is, how do you do this? How do you have a moment in which you are angry, but you are not sinning? And I would say that what motivates your anger and what you do with it determines whether it's righteous. What motivates your anger and what you do with it determines whether or not it's righteous. To be a Christian means to have the heart of God. And to have the heart of God means to get angry about what angers God. And so if Jesus is the physical embodiment of God, what makes Jesus angry? In fact, what makes Jesus so angry that he would spend 25 minutes making a whip and clear out the whole temple because he's so angry that he throws the biggest outward tantrum of his life? And some of you are just like, I already know the answer to this. It's Democrats. It is. That's what it is. No, not that. It's the gay agenda. That's what it is. It's got to be rated R movies, cussing, tube tops. It's tube tops. Jesus hates inappropriateness. Cleavage makes him mad. Secular music and dancing, that's what it is. Non-King James Bibles, that's what it is. Oh, I know. Food dye. That's what it is. Nothing pushes him over the edge like these. And what interestingly, it's not any of this stuff. In this story, it's merchants. And it's not that they're selling things. The reason he's angry at these particular merchants is that they are creating obstacles for people who are searching for God. That's the problem. Because the truth of the matter is, nothing angers Jesus more than insiders making it hard for outsiders to come in. This is what enrages the heart of God. This is what pushes God to take action. You see, these merchants are set up in the temple's outer courts, the court of the Gentiles. And Gentile just means not Jewish, so non-believers. We would call them maybe unchurched people. It was where believers met with unbelievers to share what it means to believe. So the only reason a Gentile would be in the court of the Gentiles is because they were curious about faith but not yet committed. They were showing up in earnest because they wanted to know more. But the Jews that they met with there in the temple courts, these merchants, their focus was on commercialism, not evangelism. They didn't care about other people getting to God. They cared about themselves getting rich. And so they overcharged for all the sacrificial animals, and they took a huge cut of every money exchange that was taking place on the property. And not only were the merchants in on it, so were all of the priests. Everybody got a cut. This would sort of be like, you know when you go to like a baseball game and you didn't eat all day? You were kind of rushing around, and so you're hungry. And you're like, I'm going to go to the concession stand. And you go to the concession stand, and you're just like, just the basics. I just want just a hot dog and just a Diet Coke. A hot dog and a small Diet Coke. And they're like, absolutely, that's $65. And you're like, what? But like you can't, there's nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No outside food or drinks. And so you just pay it because you're trapped. You're stuck there, and you are hungry. But the people in this story are not just being overcharged for food, they're being overcharged for God. And in Jesus' mind, everybody ought to be able to come to God for free. They ought to be able to question faith for free. They ought to be able to stumble into knowing who they were made to be and what it means to be clean in a relationship with their Maker for free. But when they came into the temple, and they reached the outer courts, instead of finding love and belonging and guidance in the temple, they just found a bunch of shallow religious people obsessed with looking good and having more than everybody else. And these Gentiles started to believe, I guess that's what God and his people are like. God just wants to see what he can get from you. God is just trying to use you and take advantage of you, so that God can get what he wants from you. And Jesus, who is God, understands this is the opposite of the heart of God, and it pushes him over the edge. He cannot stand by and let it happen. And despite the way some churches feel now, because some of you are like, well, that's why for the longest time I didn't want to go to church. And I felt like hurt by the church. I felt like I just hated the idea of Christians and God, was because I felt like this is exactly what I experienced, the same thing Jesus saw that day. But honestly, this has been a core tenet of Jesus' followers since the beginning. In the book of Acts, which is sort of this history book of the early church, in Acts chapter 15, verse 19, the author says, we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. This is a big statement that is being made to all of the church leaders from one of its founders, saying this ought to be a core tenet of why we exist. We ought to make it as easy as possible on outsiders to come in. This is who we should always be. In other words, what he's saying is we ought to remove every obstacle in the way of anyone learning about, experiencing, and following Jesus. And our mission here at South Hills has been exactly this since day one. This is why we were founded and why we still exist and the reason we do everything we do the way we do it. This is why we don't charge to get in to church. You did not pay a ticket price today. This is why everyone's invited. This is why there's no dress code. This is why when you come on campus, people are kind and real and normal. This is why there's free coffee and donuts, and they're good donuts. We taste tested. This is why we teach on topics that real people wrestle with in their real lives. This is why we don't use a lot of churchy language. This is why I don't read when I preach from a King James Bible. This is why we make church fun for kids and have a service that's specifically for students. This is why we encourage people to get to know and serve and care about their neighbors. This is why we give out free Bibles and resources and food and anything else we can afford to give. Because if there's one thing we're passionate about, it is making it easy for outsiders to come in and find Jesus. But in this story, Jesus didn't walk into our church. He walked into an ancient temple, and he sees insiders taking advantage of outsiders. and he makes a scene to expose what he sees because he wants everyone to stop and pay attention to the wrong things that they've all learned to ignore. And it works. Everybody freezes, and they stare at him, and they begin to think. And some of you are thinking like, I love this, I'm in. I'm going to take a baseball bat down to some businesses that I do not like because I want to be like Jesus. And that is not the point here, okay? This story is not giving you permission to do that, right? Because there's a whole lot of cultural context that you are probably missing if that's what you were taking away. Jesus is engaging in the long-standing Jewish tradition of prophetic theater. And this is super common at this time in history, not real common in our time in history. This is where a spiritual teacher would perform a dramatic act in public to highlight injustice and critique social norms. And Scripture is full of examples of this, right? Especially in the Old Testament and even on into the New Testament. Isaiah, who's one of the Old Testament prophets, walked around naked for 3 years to demonstrate God's coming judgment. And some of you are like, glad I didn't live then. That's weird. Jeremiah wore a wooden yoke to illustrate that the people were going to be taken captive and put to work by another nation. Ezekiel, who we named our son after, he ate food from a poop fire to show God is disgusted with the people's sin. He was a wild child, and we named our kid accurately. John the Baptist in the New Testament, who was alive at the same time as Jesus, like he lived in the woods. He was enormously hairy and dirty, and he ate locusts and wild honey because the point he was trying to make was that paying attention to spiritual things is more important than just being materialistically comfortable. These were all ways that people were communicating a message that God had in this sort of standstill moment that everybody could pay attention to. And when Jesus is doing this, he's participating in that tradition. And everyone around him in that culture had like a category for this type of thing. And so they don't just see a random guy having an outburst. They see a spiritual teacher participating in prophetic theater. Now, our culture doesn't have a category for prophetic theater today. So if you go to the mall and smash some display cases, people are going to record you, put you on YouTube, and you are going to prison. Okay, that's what's going to happen. And honestly, there were consequences for what Jesus did too. It says right after this story that the businessmen who Jesus made an example of in this moment began immediately plotting to kill him. And it wasn't because they didn't like his theology. It was because he messed with their money. And that was their God. And man, has much changed? Like, Jesus, you can have my whole life. I mean, not my money, but like you can have everything. I trust you with my eternity to save me from hell. I mean, obviously you can't save me from the economy, but like you can save me from my sins. It's the hardest thing for us to let go of. But let me ask you this. I wonder how different you are from the people in this story. That's what these stories are designed to do, to get us to reflect on ourselves and to see ourselves in the story. And here's the thing. I like to think when I read Bible stories that I'm the good guy, but sometimes I'm the bad guy, if I'm honest. Like, what is church actually about for you? Is church about what you can get as an insider, or is it about what you can give to help outsiders find a way in? Because this is the biggest feud that Jesus had with religious people during the time. What do you think this is about? Do you think this is about you just trying to get everything you want? No, that's not godliness, that's greediness. This is about you laying your life down and using everything God has given you to help outsiders find a way and find a new home, find connection with Christ. To take it a step further, what is being a Christian about for you? Is it about you appearing godly, or is it about you helping other people access God, no matter how it makes you look? These are the questions Jesus wants us to wrestle with. And sometimes when we read stories like this, what we realize, if we are honest with ourselves, is that we are not always the one Jesus is flipping the tables for. We're sometimes the one he is flipping the tables on. And sometimes we can hear a story like this and we can mistakenly think like, oh, I get the message. I'm going to get out there and tell people what they're doing wrong. I'm going to flip some tables myself. But here's the reality, and maybe your wife's been trying to tell you this for years. You are not Jesus. You don't get to do all the things that he did exactly how he did them. In reality, as you place this story in context with the rest of the New Testament, we learn that as Christians, your responsibility is to be an example of what's right, not to get revenge on those who are getting it wrong. In fact, the Apostle Paul wrote in Romans chapter 12, verse 17, never pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see you are honorable. Do all that you can to live at peace with everyone. Never take revenge. Leave that to God. In other words, your job is to do good. God's job is to settle the score. So like you're to do your job and to trust God to do his. That's what faith is. Faith is where you're like, God, what have you asked me to do? And God's like, I want you to do this. And you're like, I don't want to do that. I want to do that. And he's like, that's my job. And you're like, well, I would like to apply for your job. And he's like, we're not taking applications. You do the thing you were assigned to do. You do good, and I am going to settle the score. And so here's your homework for this week, is this. To, at some point during the week, to critique something bad by contributing something good. And in our culture, this is not what we do. We critique things that are bad by complaining about the bad things we don't like. But when you watch Jesus, when you watch Christians in the Gospels, instead of complaining about the bad, the biggest critiques they would give were through creativity. What you may not see is on the other side of this story, on either side of it, is Jesus building a new kind of church. He's creating something new to critique the system that is currently broken. He participates in this moment of prophetic theater to get people's attention that something is broken with the way they're doing things, that the thing that was built to help people get to God is now in the way of them connecting with that God. But it's not just people being like, oh no, it's horrible. He's like, but I've already started this new thing where everybody belongs, where everybody can be a part of. And this is not something that is brand new because nobody has ever thought of it before. This was my intent from the very beginning. And I am bringing us back to it now. And I wonder what thing that frustrates you, that instead of folding your arms and being frustrated and just being like, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to, what would it look like for you to critique it by contributing good in the direction you want to go instead of complaining about the bad direction that other people are taking it in? I think this is the true marker of somebody who's really been transformed by God, that they create more than they complain, that they contribute more than they complain. I think this is who God has made you to be. And when people find you doing this, I think they see through you and they see Christ in you. And this is what I want to pray into your life today, that God would give you the power to do this, that you would be angry appropriately and not sin, that your anger would drive you to do good. Would you bow your heads with me across this building? I want to just pray this into your life today. God, we are so grateful for the way in which you love us, the way in which you care for us, the way in which you provide for us. Again, I'm thankful that it was always your intent to include everyone. From the very beginning, even in the book of Genesis, you call people and you tell them that you are going to bless everyone through them. That it wasn't an exclusive thing for a few, that it was an inclusive thing for all. And God, we are a part of the all. This room is full of Gentiles. That Jesus removed the obstacles for us so that we could get to God. And God, I thank you that you don't just do that for us, but you inspire us to continue doing that for other people, to remove obstacles, to remove barriers, to get everything out of the way, to make it easy to invite people to come and discover you and learn about who you are and learn what it looks like to follow you and connect with you and be loved by you, to learn what it looks like to step by step move in your direction and experience life to the full that nothing else can give us the satisfaction of. And God, I pray that as each of us leave this place today, that we would notice the things that are off and unjust in the world because they are preventing people from knowing and experiencing and finding you. And God, we would remove those barriers, not by throwing a human fit and pretending it's righteous, but by contributing something good, creating something new, giving all we have and all we are to make the world better so that people can see you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. And everybody said, amen, amen.